Number 10. An odd man in the woods. I was a park ranger on a small island, the only year-round resident. I loved the off-season with 400 acres all to myself, no phone, no internet. I was in the old forest one night when I saw a smear of bright white off-trail ahead. I figured it was one of the small herd of white-rumped deer, but it moved up the side of the trail before I could get a better look. I heard a sharp bark and froze, then crept forward a few feet. I reached the fork and was straining to see ahead when I heard the crunch and crack of something in the brush behind me. I spun and saw a pale man, 6 foot or taller, with dark hair, wearing a bright white t-shirt about 30 feet in front of me. He gave me a lunatic grin, barked again, a hard, sharp ha, then turned and ran off into the woods. I stood still, scanning the trees, my hand on my weapon. After not hearing anything for a few moments, I backtracked my way to the main trail, then, terrified, sped walked all the way back to my cabin. I don't know who or what it could have been. The way he was running around off the trail convinced me that he knew the island very well, better than me for sure, and that he was hiding out somewhere, but I never found any evidence of a secret lair, and I never saw him again. Number 9. Small humanoid creature. This happened about 8 years ago when I was 21 years old and working as a camp counselor in New York State. The place is basically a bunch of cabins in the woods on top of a mountain, each cabin half a mile apart from the other, so you're pretty isolated in the woods. One night at about 1 a.m. I was sneaking off to meet my camp girlfriend. Suddenly I heard rustling in the woods and I stopped to investigate it. There are bears / other animals, so I was expecting something like that. Then this 3 foot tall humanoid type thing suddenly jumps out of the bushes and looks at me. It's too dark for me to make out any of its features other than it was standing on 2 feet, had 2 arms, and basically looked just like a miniature person without any features. I was curious to what it was, so I started walking towards it and it spooked, bolting back into the woods. I'll never forget how mechanical it looked as it took off running. I have never seen anything on 2 legs run that quickly, so I was pretty confused about what it was. As much as I try to make sense of it, I still to this day have no idea what it was. It was very human, but too short to be a human, and I don't know how a human could run that fast anyway. Now, I feel like this could have been some sort of animal perhaps, but it's still creepy. Number 8. Crying baby. My grandfather used to be the equivalent of a park ranger down in Mexico. He was in charge of patrolling the farms and lands mainly due to people growing illegal substances. One day he said he was patrolling this ranch late at night shift and he heard a baby crying. Now the land is pretty flat, so he looked all ways and saw nothing. He thought maybe it was some goats out in the far as they can sound like crying babies, but as he's walking his route he hears the same sound, looks up in the sky, and swears he saw a witch with black clothing and everything flying towards a mountain. He panicked, ran to his car, and drove off as fast as he could. Now, this could have been a bird or something, but being alone at night outside, your mind can definitely play tricks on you. Number 7. The blue lights. I used to work as a ranger at Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. There's a place on the ranch called Urica Mesa, and there's all sorts of local legends about it being haunted. One of the stories about the mesa is that at night you can see weird lights coming from the top. I've been there for 4 summers and even camped on top of the mesa and had never seen one until one night. A scout troop and I were camped on the back side of the mesa. I hadn't told them any of the haunted stories at this point when one of the kids points up to the mesa and asks, "What's that?" I figured he's seeing some flashlight coming down the trail from the mesa because I know there's supposed to be another group camping with us, so I tell him that. I turn to look and the lights weren't coming from where the trail is, they were off to the right and it's not a flashlight. It's like the light was coming from behind the mesa or from a fire that you can't see. Only it wasn't orange-red like firelight, it was blue. Creepiest thing ever because if the blue lights are real, what else is real? At this point though, I'm still thinking it's the other group, but like 15 minutes later they roll into camp and we can still see the lights. Spooky. Number 6. Perfectly severed deer head found on trail. Ugh. I'm a ranger at Yellowstone. A couple weeks ago, I was exploring the Lamar Valley, about 11 miles from the nearest road and even further to the park boundary. There, in the middle of the trail, is a perfectly severed deer head. No blood, no raggedness at the severance. Perfectly intact. Now, this is weird because I have seen wolf and bear spoils, and I used to find cougar prey remains in SD with radio tracking just after the cougar made them. This was not any of those things. The head was completely uneaten, eyes, tongue, everything intact. Even the ravens hadn't touched it yet. No catching, no droppings. Right smack in the middle of the trail, but again, no blood. Even a human doing it made no conventional sense. It was a doe, so it had no antlers, plus why leave it in the trail? Whole thing, even in broad daylight, gave me the chills. Just an ocean of waving grass, bison calmly grazing, and a perfectly clear deer head on the path. Now, this sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, and I am terrified. Number 5. Dead body. I was a wildland firefighter, specifically a hotshot, for the US Department of Agriculture. We saw a lot of backcountry in national forests that no one ever saw. Once, on a fire in South California, we helicoptered deep into the woods, then hiked 8 or so miles. We were way out when we discovered human remains, clothes, etc. We opened the wallet and find a note, then found the thing he used with one bullet missing. We examined the skull and discovered the guy used it on himself. Very creepy in person. A crew flew out and investigated, piecing together his ID and missing person reports. They discovered he'd been out there for more than a decade. Number 4. Abandoned tent. The oddest thing was the abandoned camp next to the trail. Camping outside of designated campsites is a big no-no, and I was surprised as one day I was walking and found a tent set up directly next to the trail. The trail ran along a nice stream and was a very tranquil spot. Inside I found a cloth sleeping bag, some dirty clothes, lots of food, big cans of SpaghettiOs, and what looked like some leftovers from a refried beans and rice dinner, and a teddy bear. Everything reeked of cigarette smoke. I was reluctant to confiscate everything and leave the individual out there with nothing, but I did take all the food and pack it into a secure food storage box. I left a note explaining where I had taken the food and that they needed to move camp. Now, I was unable to return to the tent for 2 weeks, way too long to leave it sitting there next to the trail. It was basically untouched when I returned. Some trail crew folks had checked it out and let me know, but that was probably it. I packed up the rest and hauled it out. I spent some time poking around in the area, but never saw any other signs of life. It was obviously someone who was not prepared for camping out in the backcountry, judging by the food, equipment, and the teddy bear. I just don't know. Everything, clothing, gear, etc. indicated it was just one individual. Number 3. Moving light. Park ranger here. Another ranger and I were out on a search and rescue call once. The missing person was a man in his 20s. He had gone hiking and had not returned the day that he intended to. When we got the call, it was nighttime, but we hiked a few miles and set up camp on a ridge that had a pretty good view. He had gone into the woods prepared, so we decided to wait until daylight before beginning the search. About 2 a.m. I get up and I am peeing when I see a moving light at the base of the cliffs across the valley a few miles away. Looks like a flashlight beam. I tell the other ranger and we make the decision to keep waiting for daylight. The next morning we decide to check it out in the area and bring this guy home. We got to approximately where I saw the light the night before and started calling his name. Soon we find his body at the base of the cliff. He had fallen 60 feet on his head. The body was badly mangled. We radioed back that it has now become a recovery instead of a rescue. At this point, the other ranger yells at me to come look at this. Lying 20 feet from the man's body was his mag light. It seemed odd, but I thought nothing of it until the other ranger reminded me of the light the night before. It kinda gave me the creeps, but I still dismissed it. Before too long, the coroner arrived and inspected the body. After he took the body back to the lab, he said that the man had been dead for at least 48 hours before we found the body. All of a sudden, the oh crap alarm went off in my brain. I knew that it couldn't be possible. I had the coroner review his work, same results. I tried to find an explanation for the light I had seen, perhaps other hikers, but one search and rescue guy had stayed at the only trailhead in the area all night. No one had come or gone. To this day, I have no clue what I saw that night, but it freaked me out. Number 2. The mysterious stranger. I once led a trip to the top of Mount Sterling in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top and about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle schoolers and had one co-instructor. We were camping out on the top of the mountain and it was a beautiful night with a full moon. I laid on a hammock enjoying the scenery and noticed something moving on the trail. Bears are common in this area, so I perked up. As I got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere and there was someone hiking up the trail with no headlamp or any gear. They arrived at the top of the mountain where we were and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man survey our camp. I could really only see the outline of him. He stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes, but may have been 10. He then turned and sat down under a tree facing our camp. He was sitting up in a way that I knew he wasn't trying to sleep. He just sat there staring at our camp. I had no idea what to do. I decided to wait it out. I waited just staring at the man while he stared at my camp. This went on until about 3:30 a.m. Then he stood up, took a moment to survey the camp a few minutes longer, and then went back down the trail he came up on. To this day, I have no idea what that was all about, and it freaks me out. That freaks me out too. And coming in at number 1, search for hikers runs through super creepy clearing. There was a group that hadn't been heard from after their scheduled return from a camping trip. A coworker and I headed out in the general direction the group had set off in. We'd been hiking for most of the day and seen nothing. We're about 35 kilometers into the woods at this point, and we start noticing odd things. Sticks carved like spears stuck into the ground, weird carvings in the trees, a children's stuffed animal hanging from a noose up in a tree. This place was nowhere near any roads. It wasn't on regular trails people would go on in the area. The really eerie thing was that everything was freshly carved. Somebody had been there within a couple of hours of us and made these things. I noticed a bit of a shirt that had caught on a small tree and ripped along with some shoe prints. We were thinking, great, maybe we're close to the group, when a radio call comes in though. The group had been found 20 kilometers east of us and they're calling everyone back. So what did we find? I have no clue, but my coworker and I headed out of those woods fast, and yeah, I would too. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the mass grave. Last year in 2021, archaeologists who were excavating the ruins of Chan Chan, which was once the capital of the Chimu Empire, they stumbled upon a mass grave that held the remains of 25 people. Most of the skeletons were that of a woman, and they are said to have been wrapped in a sort of cotton fabric before being wrapped in a material made of plant tissue. Some of the women were even placed in a seated position with their legs bent, some with needles, chalk, and sewing objects placed near them. There were also quite a few ceramic objects found in the grave as well. The abundance of artifacts found here has led researchers to believe that these people were considered elite members of the society. The empire that these people are believed to have belonged to was one that is said to have fallen to the Inca sometime between 1465 and 1470. In our number 9 spot today, we have the 500-year-old tomb. Just over a month ago at the end of June, scientists unearthed an Inca-era tomb that laid underneath a home in Peru's capital, Lima. The tomb is said to be at least 500 years old, and the lead archaeologist of the discovery team said that it contained, quote, multiple funerary bundles. This tomb is said to likely be holding the elite from the time, and the current owner of the home the tomb was found under was absolutely bursting with pride. He explained that he hoped that the find would create a better appreciation for the rich history around all of those who live in the area. The find only came because the owner of the home was planning on some new building things. Because of this, there was a required archaeological survey, and thank goodness for that, clearly. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Nazca Lines. If you were to head to the Nazca Desert just about 200 miles southeast of Lima in southern Peru, you'd find the most famous geoglyphs in the world, the Nazca Lines. Researchers believe that these lines might be something like 2 millennia old, and other than how they are incredible works of art, they are completely baffling. The geoglyphs are more than 800 long white lines etched into the desert, as well as 300 geometric shapes and 70 different animal figures. The biggest shape stretches about 1,200 feet across, which leads to my point about why these lines are so incredibly fascinating. These images can only be fully seen from high above in the air. So thinking back 2,000 years ago, how did humans make these without the vantage points we have now? I'm not exactly sure, but it is definitely nothing shy of amazing. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Paleo Burrow. Back in 2010, a geologist named Amilcar Adami heard rumblings glimpse of an insanely impressive cave that was located in Brazil. He knew he had to check it out, and after asking around a bit, he eventually found out the location of it. When he first arrived, while he was absolutely shocked at what he found, because he was unable to contact the owner of the land, he wasn't able to fully inspect the cave. The reason the cave was so interesting was because of the fact that he could tell it wasn't created by some sort of geological process. Finally, in 2015, he was able to return to the cave for study, and this is when it was realized that this was the first Paleo Burrow ever discovered in the Amazon. Seeing the strange features of the cave as well as what looked like claw marks on the ceiling, it became clear that this cave was created by generations of some sort of gigantic, ancient, burrowing creature. It is believed that the animal responsible for these caves is an extinct species of ground sloth that grew to be 15 feet tall and was 5,000 pounds. It's an incredible discovery that unveiled even more than what might have met the eye. In our number 6 spot today, we have Machu Picchu. Perhaps one of the most famous archaeological discoveries in South America, this incredible and stunning site was built over 500 years ago, and it was once known as the lost city of the Inca. Our modern discovery of this site came in 1911 when the archaeologist Hiram Bingham and his team stumbled upon it almost accidentally while looking for another ancient city. The stones used to create this site weighed over 50 tons, and it certainly doesn't have a location that would have been convenient to its construction. Through earthquakes and all of the terrible weather that the Earth has seen in the last 500 some years, Machu Picchu remains, and that is a testament to how brilliant their work really was. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Inca mummies. In 1976, researchers found 2 mummies at a burial site in northern Chile. These 2 corpses belonged to 2 young women who were the victims of human ritual sacrifice. It is likely that the sacrifice they were a part of was one that was carried out by the Inca to commemorate either historical or political events, or as a response to a natural disaster. The mummies were found wearing silver ornaments, and they were surrounded by ceramic vessels, and they were wearing red robes. The red in the Inca clothing was often created using hematite or other iron oxides, but upon further inspection of these mummies, it was revealed that their red clothing held something much more dangerous. The dye used for their clothing contained cinnabar, which is a mineral rich in mercury. This was often used in the ancient world as a pigment for makeup, clothing, and paint, but handling it leads to mercury poisoning. What is strange is that researchers believe that the toxicity of cinnabar was known in ancient Peru, so we aren't exactly sure why they used it in the first place, but it's thought that it might have been used as protection against grave robbers. In our number 4 spot today, we have Puma Punku. This site is located in Bolivia, and it boasts a series of stone structures. One of the most notable and remarkable things about this site is how precisely the stones here were cut. It is believed that this site dates back to somewhere around 536 AD, and while it now lay in ruins, it is thought to have once been an incredibly wondrous place filled with things like polished metal plaques, bright ceramics, and a bunch of different fabrics. It isn't quite known exactly what this site was used for entirely, partly because of its age, but also because of the lack of written record and the deterioration that can be seen at the site. Because of the impressive size of the site as well as the technology that was used to build it, this is a place that many people often say was built by aliens, but it was actually just the Incas. They were incredibly talented craftsmen, and just because we couldn't pull it off today doesn't mean we should take their credit away. In our number 3 spot today, we have Whale Hill. In 2010, in the Atacama Desert in Chile, some road work was being done when the fossils and bones of 40 whales were found among the remains of other marine animals. Remember, this is in the desert and about 40 meters above sea level, so how is this even possible? I feel like I could totally understand like maybe a few fish, but 40 whales, some dolphins, seals, and swordfish? Something strange certainly must have been at play. Like I'm sure many of you are thinking, maybe the remains were from a time when the sea was once there, but unfortunately that too has been debunked. It isn't exactly clear what happened here, but the belief is that these animals may have consumed some kind of toxic plant or algae and somehow ended up washing ashore only to pass away in this location. In our number 2 spot today, we have Sacsayhuaman. This site is located in Cusco, Peru, and it is another fascinating and seemingly impossible stone structure that was built by the Incas. This structure was once believed to have been a fortress, but now it is believed it may have actually been used for things like ceremonies. Why this is another incredible creation is because of the fact that we can't quite figure out how it could have been built. The stones in the structure fit together so perfectly that they're able to stay together without anything holding them in place, and they've done so for years and years. This, coupled with how large some of the stones were, is enough to completely
stump experts. Despite how well the stones all fit together, apparently they all have different shapes, which has led researchers to believe that the building design was kind of made up as the structure was being built. Imagine that, improvising building a structure and it lasts for hundreds of years and goes on to stump humanity for a while. I'm just saying, this is pretty cool. It becomes more and more apparent how talented and brilliant the Inca really were. In our number 1 spot today, we have the sacrificial offerings. In 2018, researchers sent some remote-operated robots beneath the ground in Peru at an archaeological site. These robots stumbled on more than anyone ever imagined when they found a network of 35 interlocked underground tunnels dating back 3,000 years. This was already an unbelievable discovery, but it turned dark when inside these tunnels, the team found a bunch of human remains. While finding a mass amount of remains would be a terrifying experience, there were 3 skeletons that stood out from the rest. They specifically stood out because they weren't like the others. They weren't the skeletons of people who had a high social standing, which almost all of the others appeared to be. These remains they found were from people who were sacrificed in rituals. They were able to determine this because of the fact that these bodies were found face down under piles of rocks, which is of course not how people of a high social standing would have been buried at this time. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Vanishing Remains. It's been over 30 years since the Titanic wreck was found, and recently scientists have made another startling discovery. As it turns out, the remains of the wreckage don't have much time left. As we speak, they are currently vanishing. The ocean liner, which is over 100 years old, has not only been beaten by the currents of the deep sea, but the main culprit for its deterioration is an iron-hungry bacteria that consumes hundreds of pounds of iron a day. This bacteria, which has been named Halomonas titanicae, is likely going to render the ship completely eroded by 2030. This means that researchers who want to discover more about the Titanic really are racing against time to get down there and see all that they can before the remains are gone, and the story of the Titanic remains just that. In our number 9 spot today, we have portholes. Since the Titanic sunk, people have been trying to figure out exactly how this unsinkable ship sank and how it sank so quickly. A recent study may have found a previously undiscussed scenario that likely contributed to the speed of the sinking ship greatly. On that fateful day, of course, the Titanic grinded to a halt, and at that point the passengers had no idea why. This led to many of them opening up the portholes in the ship to get a look out in case they could see anything that would be stopping them from continuing on their journey. Many of those who opened the portholes didn't close them after, and with every open porthole that went underwater, it is estimated that it doubled the size of the damage to the ship. It is possible that these open windows may have caused the ship to sink at double the rate it would have had those windows been closed. Of course, this is not to blame the passengers, however, as this tragedy is certainly not their fault. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Brittle fracture. This is another one of those theories behind how the Titanic found itself at the bottom of the North Atlantic. There was an expedition down to the wreckage of the Titanic recently, and it revealed something interesting about the hull of the ship. There were these large pieces of steel that were recovered, each with about 3 rivet holes 1.25 inches in diameter. These pieces revealed that the hull's iron rivets failed to brittle fracture, which is the sudden and rapid snapping. This means that there was a failure in the structural materials, and this usually happens as a result of low temperature, high impact loading, and high sulfur content, all 3 of which were present on the night of the tragedy. The water temperature was below freezing, the Titanic was traveling at a high speed upon impact with the iceberg, and the hull steel contained high levels of sulfur. These chunks of metal gave researchers one of the main answers as to why the Titanic sunk that night. In our number 7 spot today, we have rich remains. When we think of the story of the Titanic, we of course think of the sinking of the ship, we talk about how the survivors were saved, and then of course we think of the catastrophic loss of life. Many people don't stop to ask what happened with all of those who passed away in the tragedy, however. More than 1,500 people passed away in the sinking of the Titanic, and only 337 bodies were pulled from the water. A scholar named Jess Beer has recently examined what was done with those bodies, and throughout this research they have come to realize that whether or not these people got identified and what happened to the remains in the end all depended on their class and economic standing in life. About 1/3 of the recovered bodies ended up being returned to the sea because rescuers didn't think that they would get any sort of life insurance payout from the families of those who had passed and who were of a lower economic standing. For any bodies to be preserved for land burial, the remains had to be easily identifiable, and they needed to have a quote economic value even after death with a high social or economic worth. In our number 6 spot today, we have the unidentified passenger. Until about 10 years ago, there were human remains that were recovered from the Titanic sinking that were unidentified despite researchers' best efforts. Initially, there was one identity that they thought they could link the body to, but there were also 5 other identities on the table, and no one was sure how to confirm who this person really was. A little over a decade ago, however, using mitochondrial DNA testing, the re-examining of the DNA gave a 98.87% certainty the unknown person was in fact a passenger named Sidney Goodwin. A man named Ryan Parr is heavily credited with helping bring this mystery to a close, although he insists it couldn't have been done without the help of numerous researchers and scientists who also worked to reveal this passenger's true identity. In our number 5 spot today, we have family ties. Lorraine Allison was just 2 years old when she boarded the Titanic with her family, her parents, and her brother. At the time of the sinking, it is said that Lorraine's brother was rushed to a lifeboat, but that the other 3 members of the family had passed in the tragedy. Despite this, only Lorraine's father's body was found, which led to the question of what happened to Lorraine and her mother. 28 years later, a woman named Helen Kramer came forward and said that she, in fact, was the missing Lorraine. Of course, people were skeptical and weren't willing to believe this, but until her death in 1992, Helen continued to claim that she was, in fact, Lorraine. After her passing, her granddaughter, Debrina Woods, resurfaced the claims by saying that she had inherited more evidence from her grandmother and that the truth should be told. Finally, a group of Titanic researchers, with the power of modern science, decided that they all wanted to solve this mystery once and for all. They did this by convincing descendants from each family to take a DNA test, and once this was done, they were able to prove that there was no relationship between the two. They were finally able to put this long disputed claim to rest officially. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Telegraph. So you know how people often explain that perhaps many more people would have been saved from the Titanic wreck if the nearby SS Californian had their telegraph operator awake when the distress call was sent? For the man who went to sleep, that's a heavy burden to bear for the rest of your life, but a recent study suggests that even if he was awake, there likely wouldn't have been anything that he could have done. Firstly, there wasn't any rule stating that this guy needed to be awake for 24 hours to man the telegraph machine, so right here, he is off the hook. This study, however, suggests that even if he was awake and the ship received the distress call, the ice around the Titanic was so thick they likely wouldn't have been able to get through to save the passengers either way. Turns out that this disaster really just had the perfect recipe for tragedy. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Titanic Radio. This is a piece of the ship that has not yet been recovered, but it's the focus of much debate on whether or not it should be retrieved from the wreckage. Known in 1912 as the Marconi wireless telegraph machine, the radio on the Titanic sent distress calls to nearby ships that ended up saving the lives of 700 people in lifeboats. Despite how many people died in the Titanic tragedy, there were debates about whether or not to retrieve the artifact because of the fact that there might still be remains located in the same area as the radio is. Lawyers have argued against the recovery of the radio because the dive plan did not include the prospect of there being human remains located down there. It also was argued because in order to retrieve it, they would need to cut into the ship's radio compartment, which was strongly opposed by preservation advocates. As of right now, it does appear as though the dive to retrieve the radio will still occur, but of course the pandemic delayed things quite a bit, so at this point it isn't exactly clear when. This radio would be a very valuable artifact, but it also would hold an eerie tale of exactly when and how the radio was used during the final moments of the Titanic. In our number 2 spot today, we have the inspection card. This inspection card once belonged to a woman named Marion Meanwell. What could possibly be worrisome about an inspection card? Well, it shows how Marion was not intended to be on the Titanic, but by some turn of events, she unfortunately found herself as one of the passengers. The card shows that she was originally meant to be traveling on a ship called the Majestic. For some reason, the trip she originally had planned was delayed, and she instead was assigned to the ill-fated Titanic. You can see that the word Majestic was crossed out on her card, which shows us the change in plans. If only people were able to see what was about to strike and they could have warned her. If Marion's body was ever recovered, unfortunately, she has never been identified. In our number 1 spot today, we have the bell. The bell from the crow's nest of the Titanic was recovered from the wreckage and returned returned to land, where it now resides in the Titanic Museum. The eerie story behind this bell is that it would have been the one that was rung 3 times by the lookout Frederick Fleet in order to attempt to warn of the iceberg that was ahead. Frederick, as well as the other lookout who was with him, Reginald Lee, both ended up thankfully surviving the incident and went on to later explain what happened from their point of view. They explained that if they had been given binoculars to assist with their job, they could have seen the iceberg sooner. When asked how much sooner, Frederick replied, quote, "Well, enough to get out of the way."
At number 10 we have an Octopus Nursery. 8-legged alien looking things with suction cups all over their arms and beaks for mouths. Octopus are creepy looking things, and to top it all off, they can camouflage like a Navy SEAL, and they are super smart. If these are the kind of things that make your skin crawl, then just running into one of these guys would probably freak you out. Well, on the underwater expedition at the Davidson Seamount, there was a rather shocking discovery. They had a remote probe that was on the ocean floor around 10,000 feet, and they came across which seemed to be an octopus that was next to not just one, not just two, but a group of 1,000 octopuses in a nursery. They were all there laying their eggs and using the heat from the volcanic vent to keep them warm. I would hate to be the guy who accidentally steps into that crack and then gets devoured by thousands of sticky arms. But if you're at 10,000 feet underwater, you probably are already screwed. At number 9 we have the Siberian lake monster. Of course, if we're doing a list of scary things that live underwater, we have to throw a giant mysterious sea monster on here. What separates the Siberian lake monster from other more popular guys that we have seen like Loch Ness and that kind of stuff is that underwater scans have actually picked this guy up. This thing is deep in Lake Labinkur, and some radar has shown that it looks like a 33-foot long creature is living there. Now this is probably just a skeleton, but if this thing is dead, it means that there was once a giant man-eating monster in this lake. I thought we were supposed to be safe in freshwater. They've nicknamed this thing the Devil, so you know he's a good time and loves company. So next time you go up to the cottage and you're swimming in the water and you feel safe, remember there might be a giant monster lurking underneath the water ready to turn you into a side dish. At number 8 we have the blue hole. Now there are several blue holes in the world. There's one in Belize, there's one in the Red Sea, there's a giant one in my heart that was left there from when Reboot ended on a cliffhanger. How are you going to end a show that so many people fell in love with on a cliffhanger? I will never trust again. Well, this one is between Cape Verde and the Caribbean islands. Scientists are really confused about this thing. It's a crack in the bottom of the ocean floor and is several thousand miles long. What's strange about this is there's no explanation of how this happened. It might have been tectonic plates moving around, but when this happened, the Earth will probably start to repair itself and there's been no sign of this. My theory is this is where Godzilla goes to sleep at night. I mean, it seems like the most logical answer. It's either that or the gateway to hell. Like, come on guys, I'm doing real science work here. At number 7 we have the Theyanaguni Complex. This was discovered by scuba divers in the 1980s. I think that's the scariest part about this one. Could you imagine going scuba diving back in the 80s? The technology back then must have been a tube going up to some guy who would blast fresh air down to you using a bicycle pump. I don't even think they had decompression sickness figured out back then. The chances of you coming up the bends was probably super high. Well, if it wasn't for a few divers in Japan who were willing to sacrifice it all to look at some cool stuff, we wouldn't know anything about the Theyanaguni Complex. It's still a mystery as to what this thing is. It looks like some temples that might have existed thousands of years ago, but when the ice age decided to melt, it would have covered this entire area. This could be why an entire civilization got plunged underwater. Or the temple could have been on a cliff, and then when a massive earthquake hit, it knocked the temple into the water. But like everything in life, there are some haters who say this whole thing is just a natural rock formation. Some people just want to ruin everything. At number 6 we have Anakora Sister Twista. One of the reasons why the underwater world is such a mystery is because we find things like this in there. Sure, there are beautiful things down there like bright fish and chubby marine mammals, but there's also the unknown, unidentified organisms like Anakora Sister Twista, which should be the name of an 80s hair metal band. But what is this thing? Well, it's a protist. And what is a protist, you may ask? Well, it's an organism that doesn't belong to any animal group, fungus, or plant group. What does that mean? I really have no idea, you guys. I think it means it could be an alien. Some alien came down to Earth for a swim and then scraped its knee on some coral, and now we have alien creatures running around the ocean, probably waiting for you to pee so it can swim up your pee hole and then work its way into your brain. It's really the only logical answer. At number 5 we have the Bimini Road. How were the pyramids made? Was it aliens coming down to share their technology and secrets with us, or was it just thousands upon thousands of slaves who sacrificed sacrificed their lives and their spines to build them? Well, we don't know and we may never know, but the Bimini Road is another one of these mysteries. It's off the coast of the Bahamas, and it looks like it could have been a pathway that was placed perfectly with giant slabs of rock. Similar to the way the pyramids were made, it seems that these large slabs of rock were too large to be moved by man, and also like the pyramids, these giant slabs were also perfectly placed so well. So where does everyone's mind go when something like this happens? Well, magic or aliens. The logical answer is that this is a natural phenomenon of the water moving and hitting the rocks to make these formations, but people think that this was made using advanced technology from aliens and could have been the road to Atlantis. Honestly, I like the Atlantis theory much better. It's more fun. At number 4, we have Colossal Squid. Yeah, this thing is a big no thanks for me. So everyone always talks about how there might be sea monsters out there, but this thing actually exists. There's never been one caught alive, but several have washed onto shores dead, and they are massive. The largest one ever discovered was 45 feet long, and it was dead. So you know there was an even bigger one out there that killed this guy. They don't even have suckers on their tentacles, they have hooks. Let me say that again. This squid has 10 giant arms covered in hooks. This thing is straight out of a horror movie. Scientists aren't even sure what something this big eats. They think it probably feeds on whales or your deepest darkest fears. I wouldn't be surprised if the colossal squid works part-time as a gatekeeper for hell. It makes me think that the old Greek stories about the Kraken might have been real. At number 3, we have underwater circles. Giant formations of circles that are formed underwater and nobody knows how they got there. These mysteries were discovered off the coast of North Carolina, Florida, and Belize. Now what are they? Like many things on this list, myself and the entire scientific community have no idea. But here are some theories. Maybe they were formed naturally by either two things, water currents or some sort of animal mating ritual. Another idea is that these things were made by ancient civilizations before the Ice Age. All these things would have been above ground and might have been art left over by some old-timey tribes. And the third theory is that they look kind of like a bullseye, so it might be some sort of nuclear missile target, and if you hit it hard enough, the explosion will cause some sort of major natural disaster like an earthquake or tsunami, or if we're lucky, both. At number 2, we have Megalodon. If you have a fear of sharks, you're gonna love this one. Megalodon was a prehistoric shark that was even bigger than the giant hooked tentacle beast that was earlier on this list. If you've already forgotten about the colossal squid, it clocked in at around 45 feet long, where Megalodon was closer to 60 feet long. It was a 60-foot shark that could probably rip a blue whale in half in one bite. Well, maybe not that, but it was still a gargantuan creature with teeth the size of Brock Lesnar's fists. This thing wouldn't even chew you, it would just swallow you whole and then fart your skeleton out into the dark cold ocean. At number 1 on our list, we have Giant Eyeball. A mysterious giant eyeball washed onto the shore of a Florida beach back in October of 2012. I don't know any other kind of giant eyeball other than a mysterious one. There's no super common regular giant eyeball just lying around. But this is also Florida. This is the state where people smoke crack at weddings and kiss alligators on the lips, so maybe it's a little more common over there. Well, this giant eyeball was found by Gino Cavacci, and he didn't know what the hell to make of it, so he took it home and then stuck it in his freezer. Then he called the cops, and the cops came in and told him, "We don't do giant eyeballs on the beach. You have to call the wildlife people." And then he called the wildlife people, and they were like, "What the hell is that?" And he was like, "I don't know, I brought it to you guys to try and figure out what it is." And then some people were like, "Maybe it's a sea monster," and other people were like, "No, it's probably from a marlin." And I think in the end, no one really knew what the hell it was. But just so you know, there's giant eyeballs out there just laying around the beach sometime.